trust is built in the little things.
Welcome to Chief Influencer, the show that explores how remarkable leaders earn trust, influence others, and move people to action. I'm your host, Anthony Schopp, co-founder of Social Driver. Through candid conversations and live events, we're on a quest to find incredible leaders in unexpected places, from Oscar-winning storytellers and ambassadors to U.S. senators, founders, and movement builders. We share the stories of these chief influencers to uncover lessons that you can apply to your own work and leadership. Because sometimes the breakthrough you need comes from someone facing a similar challenge in a completely different field. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, JoAnne S. Bass. Before we dive in, here are three things I think you should know about today's guest. First, she made history as the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force and the first woman to serve as the highest-ranking enlisted leader of any U.S. military service. In that role, she advised the Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Air Force on the readiness, resilience, development, and well-being of more than 600,000 airmen and their families. Second, her leadership was shaped by more than 3 decades of service. Since joining the Air Force in 1993, Chief Bass led at the squadron, group, wing, and higher headquarters levels, with experience in joint service, special operations, and deployment supporting Operation Southern Watch, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom. And third, what stands out to me most is how she talks about influence. Chief Bass reminds us that trust is built in the little things, that the right people need to be in the room regardless of rank, and that real progress requires caring more about the outcome than who gets the credit. Chief Bass, you've been called many things: a trailblazer, a truth teller, a champion for airmen, and one of the most consequential enlisted leaders in modern military history. You're already used to being called Chief, and today we're thrilled to call you a Chief Influencer. Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anthony. And I think I told you that there was no way I was not going to be on this podcast with you, especially because it's called Chief Influencer. I'm like, well, I'm technically a chief and have been for a while. So anyway, I'm so excited. I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing, the folks that you're touching, the word that you're spreading. And so thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the work that you do. The last time that we spoke, or I guess it was really kind of when we first were introduced to one another, was at the annual convening for Face the Fight.
Yes.
And for those who don't know, that's a life-saving initiative founded by USAA, Reach Resilience, and the Humana Foundation that now unites more than 250 cross-sector partners, like corporations, nonprofits, academic institutions, even the VA, to dramatically reduce veteran suicide by 2032. And we're obviously so grateful for your role as an ambassador and the work you're doing to amplify that. And we had a panel discussion. It's actually a previous episode of Chief Influencer that folks may have already heard. And if they haven't, I hope they'll go check out that episode from a couple months ago. But during that panel, you talked about trust being built in the little things. And you reminded us that real progress requires caring more about the outcome than who gets the credit. So I'd love to pick up there. When the mission is urgent, how do leaders build the trust required to bring people and organizations and systems together around a shared outcome? I mean, that's the real power of influence, and it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. You know what I would offer to leaders is, and most know this, but we need to continually, be thoughtful of this. It is that trust is built in the little things. It's not built on the speeches. It's not built on the big platforms. And oh, by the way, trust needs to be built before the crisis. It needs to be built before all things happen. And so, as a leader, it's in the interactions, it's in the engagements, it's in the decision-making process, it's in the relationship and reputation that your teammates, your employees, your colleagues, and coworkers all have in you. And I would say that if we do those things right and we build a reputation based on character and judgment and decision making, and we build the trust, it's easier for people to want to follow toward that shared outcome. The other thing that I would say about the outcome piece is I think that as leaders, we have a responsibility to have some level of transparency on what it is that we're trying to do. I'll never forget being a junior service member and feeling so disconnected to, well, okay, I get that we're doing these things, but I actually don't know why. Right, like Simon Sinek talks about, the why. We have to start to help all folks, stakeholders, shareholders, employees, everybody who's involved, management. If we all understand kind of where we're going to, and it's no different than team sports, but if we all understand what the outcome is, it's easy to rally around something like that. And it's easy for us to then be part of the trust building as well.
Yeah. The start with why, I guess,
Yeah.
is the great lesson that Simon Sinek
Yeah.
TED Talk, and I'm sure there's books and things from that too. As we kind of go back into your history, would love to have you share a little bit about how you ended up in the Air Force. Did you have a parent in the Air Force who encouraged you to choose that branch of service?
It was even better. I had a parent in a different branch of service who encouraged me to go the Air Force. So I let amongst to your military audience, by the way, and your military group, they'll get this, right? Like, amongst all the different branches of service, there is a fun, friendly rivalry. But we can only do it with each other. Like, nobody else can participate, but there's a fun rivalry. And in the Air Force, we get picked on sometimes because life is good in the Air Force. And so we allow our Army and Marine brothers and sisters to kind of give us grief. But I always joke back and say, but you send your kids to the Air Force. And so my dad, way back when, served in the United States Army for 24 years. I watched him, Anthony, get up every morning and do PT at like 4:30 in the morning. And I thought, no way, like that is not for me. And so I end up joining, and I grew up old school. My dad wasn't going to pay for my college. And I wasn't quite mature enough yet to go to college. And I remember him saying to me, 4 years in the military never hurt anybody. And so I took him up on that, and I thought I'd do 4 quick years, get my GI Bill, and figure out life. And what's interesting is, I re-enlisted at my 4 year mark because I had a Honda Civic to pay for and all the things. And I started to understand what this thing called service meant. And I started to understand what it means to, be part of a higher calling. And quite frankly, at about the 8 year mark, I knew I was going to stay in through at least 20 years. And I ended up staying, and serving for 31 years. And I can tell you that the Air Force has given me way more than I've given it. And it was and is a great way of life.
What do you think it is about an organization that, it does something that keeps you there? Because leaders who run organizations listening to this, retention is, attraction and retention is a big part of what they do. So I think it's really powerful that you had that experience and you knew at that point you were going to continue service and, what you said about the Air Force doing more for you. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts about how to influence on the inside and the type of culture that retains the best talent.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said about the culture aspect that you're talking about, but also having a shared purpose. And when you wear the uniform and serve in the military, or I'd offer, wear any uniform, right? You kind of have that common uniformity of understanding what our purpose is. And I think us rallying around that is one aspect of it. The other aspect I would say is, you hear this saying all the time that people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. And that is true whether you're in the military or outside the military. And you can talk to anybody about that, right? It's not money. There's different factors that come at play, but it really is, that relationship that you have and that culture and the feeling that that person has within that organization. And the boss plays such a critical role. And the one thing, well, there's a lot of things, but I'll tell you that the military knows how to grow and develop leaders. I would offer no organization in the world grows and develops leaders like the United States military, doesn't matter what branch. Nobody, no other organization sends their 100% of their workforce and employees into a 7-week training kind of, to onboard them and then top them off with more, competency-based training. And then they continue to get training and education throughout their tenure, whether it's 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 28 years. We are constantly focused on building leaders of character and competence, to ensure that we can grab 18, 19, 20-year-olds and rally them toward the mission that we have, which is to be America's 911. I mean, that's a huge mission. So we've got to take our leadership development seriously, and we do.
And it sounds like, embedded in that lesson is advice for leaders to really look at what they are doing to onboard and what they are doing to train. And it sounds like there's some lessons they could really learn by looking at the military about how that's structured.
Absolutely. I speak to a lot of C-suite leaders now, as I've taken the uniform off, and most of them want to understand how to lead through crisis, how to lead through challenging times. And one of the things that I share with them is you need to hire some veterans, and you need to allow those veterans to build your leadership development programs within your company. What I see too often, especially in the corporate world, is that leadership development is really strong at the senior levels. But that's great, but where it's really needed is kind of at that frontline supervisor level, and that helps your retention. That frontline supervisor, again, is typically the decision maker on, if somebody's gonna stay or not.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the role that you had as Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. I mean, you represented more than 600,000 airmen and their families. This is close to my heart because my stepdad had a wonderful career in the Air Force, so I've heard many stories about it. And I wonder if you could talk about how you balance being the voice of the force with responsibility, of also advising senior leaders at the highest levels. That seems to me like it could have some natural tension involved, when your job is to influence.
Yeah, for sure. You know, what else another thing that I share with a lot of our leaders is, when you start to become a senior leader, in our case, when you become a senior NCO, or senior officer, you have to be a senior communicator. And what that means is you've got to be able to communicate through kind of all echelons, upward, downward, horizontally, to be able to get the desired effect that you want for, whatever you're seeking out, whatever your objective is. And so the only way that I'm going to be a good Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, and represent our families is if I can communicate well, verbally and written. And that means I've got to be able to once listen, speak, understand the voices of all the people that I'm able to help advocate for, but I have to be able to translate that to a senior leader within the military, to Congress, to the American public, to corporations, to academia. And so really being able to communicate well, is something that I tried to continually practice, and I still continually practice. I read a lot of books. I observed and watched some people that I admired, and constantly focused on how do I make sure that I represent and communicate well, so that it can go back to this one principle that my mom gave me a long time ago, as a young kid, which is do your job and do it well. And so the only way I'm going to, again, be the best leader for the United States Air Force at that time was I've got to do my job, do it well, and learn to communicate.
Yeah. I think that a lot of leaders I'm hearing from, on these interviews are saying that communication it's always been important at the leadership level, but it's more important than ever because what you communicate on the inside, there's no barrier between inside and outside anymore, right? I mean, with recording and Zooms and social media, and that those who have communication training in their careers, it really positions them to be as effective as possible when they're at the top. And it sounds like you're reflecting that. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what you've seen from communication and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned along the way. What did um, you know, Airman Bass not know that Chief Bass knew?
Chief Bass knows a lot more than Airman Bass knows, and again, it's called reps and sets. And I tell people all the time, you can't outsource leadership, you can't outsource communication. You literally have to get the reps and sets in. And so, lucky for me, I actually learn when I get things wrong. And being the daughter of a Korean mom who is tells you the truth all the time, whether you want to hear it or not. Like, I appreciate feedback, even if it's what I don't want to hear. Um, and so what I'll say is, especially as leaders, if you allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable and you tell your teams that you want feedback and you need feedback so that you can be better, and you set the culture and the climate where there's a sense of psychological safety, where people can speak freely, respectfully, professionally, but freely. There's a lot of goodness that can come from that. So Airman Bass throughout the years learned to listen to feedback, because feedback's a gift. Um, internalize that feedback. Some is good, some is not, but how do you internalize it? And then how do you make yourself better? At the Kind of still on that communication trend, I'll tell you the last 4 years of being in uniform, I was on the road about 250 days out of the year, speaking with our service members as well as leaders, congressional leaders, all of it. And I knew how the stakes were high when I would speak with leaders. And so after every mission that we had, it was very normal for my team and I to get on the plane or huddle up right after the mission, and we would debrief. And that debrief consisted of going around the room to all the, teammates who were on that mission to say, what could have been better? What went well? You know, and they always tell me, "Chief, you take way too long to answer your questions," right? Like, I got it. But they're giving me feedback to help me and maybe see things that I missed. And so that happened, Anthony, every single mission. There was never a mission that we never debriefed, or my team could give me honest feedback on how well I did or didn't communicate and where I could have improved.
That's such a great lesson, taking that time. It could seem like we're too busy to do that,
Yeah.
but taking that time for the
Yeah.
debrief
Yeah.
really made a big difference, it sounds like. And I was gonna ask you, and this sort of relates to that, obviously the military is such a hierarchical institution, rank and chain of command really matter. And it seems like it could be challenging to create a culture where people feel empowered to speak honestly upward. And I wonder if you could share, I mean, the debrief sounds like one moment that you did. How did you make sure people at different levels felt comfortable speaking up? And then outside of those debriefs, what did you find about getting feedback and making sure people felt comfortable sharing feedback when, again, you have the chain of command?
Yeah. What's interesting? I've seen a shift. When I joined the Air Force over 30 years ago, um, there was definitely a culture and a climate where you didn't go talking to folks above you, right? Like, you went to your supervisor and that was it. And matter of fact, if you had ideas on how to make the Air Force better, it may or may not have even went past your supervisor, right? Like, there was definitely kind of that chain of command, and there still is a chain of command. But I tell folks all the time now in present day, don't kind of, confuse the chain of command with the chain of communication.
Uh,
Because we're in a very different world today where information flows, in seconds. something can happen here in the United States and over in Korea, they'll know about it within seconds. And narratives matter today more than ever. And so I'm a big believer in flattened communication. I can assume that if it, as a chief master in the Air Force, maybe I might send out a message and it'll trickle down to the levels below me and then the levels below them. And maybe in a couple months it might happen. What we've seen is when we send out memos and think that that's going to happen, there's some places it's effective, some places it's not. Some people, don't hear anything. And in this day and age, I think the flattened communication of as a leader within an organization to be able to just kind of shotgun blast out the intent, the truth, the why to an organization, and then allow your leaders to help explain that to all the folks is really helpful. Um, the other thing I would say is this generation's different than mine. I was taught to be fearful of ever talking to anybody of a certain rank. Not this generation. In fact, Anthony, I was at one of our schoolhouses yesterday talking to some of our most junior airmen that we were educating them on how to be frontline supervisors. And these airmen are bold and they have questions and they aren't afraid to talk, and again, I think that's predicated on the culture and the climate that a leader brings with them. That if they come into the room and they're like, hey, I actually genuinely want to hear what you have to say about this, your folks are going to talk, but you've got to set the conditions as a leader.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management. Through flexible graduate degrees and certificate programs, GSPM prepares today's professionals to lead in strategic communications, public affairs, advocacy, and politics. Learn more at gspm.gwu.edu. So I'm hearing the big culture change that we all have to adapt to, which make, obvious, I think, but that it's helpful to hear that's also happening in the military because I didn't know if that was the case. But also, I really love what you said about not confusing the chain of command with the chain of communication.
Yes.
Because you can put together a great corporate communications plan. We're going to make this announcement. It's going to go to this person. But I mean, people can be slacking and texting and chatting and posting on Instagram or X or all kinds of things. And that is not going to respect the communications plan that you put together in the order of operations. And so keeping that in mind, I think, is a really important thing for leaders today at any organization, and even thinking of their constituents outside of the organization. We just can't control the flow of information as much as we used to, and we can't control the narrative as much as we used to, which is why it's so important to develop a narrative and do it from a place of authenticity and transparency so that, it actually connects.
Yeah. Well, one last piece that I'll put in there, because you're kind of making me put my ops intel hat on. From a military perspective, we study the challenges that we have today, and one of them is in the information space. And what I share with leaders, again, even outside the military, is we're in an environment where he who gets the information out first wins. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. And so as a leader, you have to understand it and respect it. And because of that, again, you've got to figure out how to be quick to respond. Large organizations typically don't like that. We like to sit back, take our time, or PA teams will take their time. And that is not helpful in today's environment where he who gets our information out first wins. If that one negative narrative goes out there, it is very hard to counter it, whether it's true or not.
That is such a good reminder. And, you're kind of reminding me, I was having breakfast not that long ago with somebody I know who works for one of these big mega global PR firms and advises, the biggest clients. And we were talking about the changing landscape. And he said, well, a lot of times my advice to clients is just, when something happens, just sit back and just wait, maybe it'll blow over. And I thought, Well, sometimes it might blow over, but sometimes you might really lose the opportunity to shape the narrative because information travels so quickly. So I kind of like left thinking, I don't know, that's the best advice.
And that's
And it
coming
just
from
kind
a
of showed
PR firm. Yeah.
right. And but again, it's, you know, was one of these big global behemoths where that might have been the way that they've operated for a long time. They've been around a long time, you know? Um, and I'm thinking from what I'm seeing, again, not that you should always have to respond to everything. Sometimes, you know, you can't respond to every comment that's out in the world that maybe people aren't seeing. But just sitting back and waiting is not always the best thing. And we've seen some really interesting examples of that lately where there have been rumors online and companies through their CEO, not through their brand, have immediately jumped into the fray to say, hey, this does not, this wasn't us, or you know, I'm thinking of a rumor around food delivery services that popped up on social media, and you know, one of the CEOs came out and responded really quickly about it. So anyway, your line there that you know, he who gets the information out first wins, I think is a really important thing for us to remember as we're communicating as a leader.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. Um, as we said in the bio, you made history as the first woman to serve as the highest ranking enlisted leader of any U.S. military service when you became the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And I just want to ask you, how did you carry the weight of being first? I mean, it's a big deal and it means a lot to a lot of people without letting that become the whole story. Because there's also just a story of incredible leadership that got you there that's not related to you know, the fact that you were the highest ranking or made history, you know, as the highest ranking woman in that role. So just
Yeah.
talk about that balance a little bit because it's something that's come up with some of our other guests when it comes to identity and embracing that and celebrating that and the authenticity of that. But at the same time, that can then become the whole story sometimes when it's really not fair for it
Right.
too.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think anybody who was a trailblazer and maybe was a first, they didn't necessarily set out to be the first, right? Like they just, like my mom said, wanted to do their job and do it well. And I never, prior to becoming the chief, thought about myself as being the first woman. You'll see articles that say the first Asian American. Like it just didn't necessarily, that wasn't at the forefront of my mind, but I understand it and I appreciate it. And I know for many, it's an example that they needed to see and have. My goal, though, always, Anthony, was that if I do my job as and I'm successful as a chief master in the Air Force, then there'll be seconds and thirds, and then we'll just one day quit counting. And so that is really kind of the lens that I took into the office was again, let's make sure that the conditions are set, that I build a strong team, and that we're able to execute the things that our Air Force needs for us. And that was really my going in plan to that. Um, so,
Yeah. And let me ask you, obviously when you enlisted, you you didn't necessarily imagine this was going to be your entire career. That came later.
yeah.
At what point on that journey did you see maybe I could
Yeah.
end up as the chief? I mean, when did that become even just part of your psyche that that could be a possibility?
So, a few minutes ago, I just shared with you that I spent some time yesterday at one of our leadership schools. I was at that very leadership school over, goodness, 30 years ago, maybe, when I remember giving a speech. And by the way, I think I was scared to death, like knees knocking, wanted to throw up. So I'm giving this speech. And somewhere I said that I want to be the first female chief master in the Air Force. What's interesting is back then, as a young service member, I probably didn't even know what that is, right? Like somewhere I must have read in the history books and whatever. And as a young senior airman in the Air Force, I said, I want to be the first female chief master in the Air Force. But then life happens. And then you become that mid tier person within your organization. and you get married and you have kids and you have subordinates and you have teammates and now I'm in this conundrum of I'm just trying to survive, right? Like I don't even wanna be a chief. I wanna survive, be a good leader, be a good mom, be a good wife, and all the things. But I continue to make rank, and grow in responsibility and get the reps and sets of a leader. And then fast forward, I have my first tour at the Pentagon, in 2016 timeframe. And serving in the Pentagon, you get to actually spend time with the leaders who run our military.
Right.
And I got a chance to spend time with the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force at that time. And I would watch how often he's on the road. I would watch what the force would do after policy decisions were made. And I remember going home telling my husband, I never want to be a chief master in the Air Force. Like that job is thankless and nobody likes you, and all the things. And so it's funny because it's cyclical, right?
Yeah.
What I've learned is never say never, and every job that you have is a setup for the next job. And so every job that I had, and to include after I served at the Pentagon, I went to Mississippi and served, and I led our training and development really for the Air Force. And then from that position got picked up to lead as Chief Master of the Air Force. So never say never. But the closer you get typically to the top, the more you realize how consequential it is. And chances are you're like, I don't want to have anything to
So,
do with it.
oh my goodness. I love hearing that story because, everyone has sort of different pathways when they end up on the top like you have, and you had that spark, that intent early on that you wanted to do it. But then that kind of faded as you were in that survival mode, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, or as you saw it up close, did and then it came back around. So that cycle is, thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
didn't know that part of the story from you. Um, Something that stands out about, you is your willingness to show personality and authenticity, including online, including with your social media presence. And I just wanna leaders used to have this sort of bright line, I think, between their personal brand and their professional brand. And now they're starting to blend, of course, much more. And the military is one of those institutions where I think the lines are still, I mean, there's still more of a separation perhaps than in some other areas, but we're starting to see it blur there as well. Um, as you know, I interviewed Deputy Secretary Paul Lawrence of the VA, and he talked about the importance of using his personal brand, his LinkedIn page, YouTube, to get the message out from himself, from a face, to veterans to understand, their benefits and so forth. So we're definitely seeing this, but you're definitely part of that as well. And I just want to ask you how you approach that. And since, taking off the uniform, as you said earlier, how your view of that uh, may have evolved, if at all.
Yeah. I appreciate the question, mostly because I wish I wasn't part of the group of the firsts that had to figure out how to really interact with our organization and everybody else online. Like, we didn't get a playbook for this. I was, I social media isn't necessarily new, but we can all remember kind of when it started amplifying and getting bigger and bigger. And when I got in the seat in 2020, I understood that the environment has really changed in the social media piece, and I understood that the majority of our force, the majority of the workforce in the military and their families are getting information online. So whether or not I want to be online makes no difference. They're going to get their information. So it goes back, Anthony, to the narrative is either we own the narrative or the narrative's going to own us, and we're just behind. And because I understood that, I actually hired a second, we call them public affairs troops, you call it PR, but I hired a second one to focus mostly on the online information space because I felt that it was that important that we had to understand what's going on there. And so that said, we did start to learn some really interesting facts. What we learned is if I put out some really good doctrine that helps your military get better, and I think it's rich, because I've been in the Air Force so long that I love studying the character of war. Like if I put something out there, like it just goes flat. Like, there might be like 30 likes on some really good doctrine that everybody should know within the organization. But let me eat a Whataburger, and see what happens. I literally was in California and we don't have Whataburger over here. So we stop and no, I'm sorry, we were at In-N-Out. Forgive
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
Whataburger fans. Anyway, there's this rivalry. So I'm literally In-N-Out. I eat a burger. And it's like, everybody in the Air Force loves it. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, we're giving good stuff that we need to know to do our jobs. And then we got the hamburger. So what we learned is our service members still wanna know that we're human beings and that we're people and that we're spouses and we're parents, and if they can connect with their leader and maybe find some levels of connection, then maybe they're willing to then read that boring 100-page doctrine that I just pushed out. And so we've learned the value of capitalizing in this domain. And it's like, I mean, it's an art and science. There's not a playbook for it, but we've learned that people, they trust more. They want transparent leaders, and when they do, they're willing to follow them. And then the harder stuff is more palatable, I think.
Sure. Oh, that's such a great I love the burger example because I think it's very, illustrative. And we have to find ways to just connect with people on that human level to get our message out so that when we do share something that's more serious and important that, we've built that trust, we've built that audience, and they'll actually pay attention.
Yeah,
That's kind of
yeah,
my takeaway there. Um, Before we wrap up, I wanna ask you about we talked about face the fight at the beginning, and I just wanna ask you a little bit more about why you decided to get involved with that effort and what it means to you because, when you, leave the service and you're speaking and you're on board, there's a lot you could do, but you've dedicated your time and your talent to some really important causes. Hiring our heroes is one, but also face the fight. So I just would love to just have you share a little bit about why you chose that because you have endless opportunities.
yeah. When you are in service for 31 years, you're it's just part of your DNA and who you are. And so although you take off the uniform, you don't quit serving. And in my case, you take off the uniform, you don't quit serving, but you also understand the importance of having a strong military and having a strong veteran community. And as a military leader, you care so deeply about your military and veteran community that you just can't hang it up. And so it just transitions. And so it was very much an easy transition to be part of Face the Fight, that is really focused on eradicating veteran suicide to nothing, right? Like, and so anything that I could do, which is sharing the same message that I had when I was in uniform, but anything that I could do outside of uniform to ensure that our veterans and their families and their extended families know that we're part of this military family, that you're not alone, that we're in this thing together. There's resources and there's help. If I can help influence that, then it's my responsibility. And I would say that to all of my fellow brothers and sisters in arms, they believe that to be true as well. And so we're all kind of locked arms in this. We appreciate the efforts that Face the Fight is doing, because it's so very important, especially for organizations outside the military, I think, to really be in support of the veteran community.
Yeah, and that's been one of my favorite things about Face the Fight is just how it's such a broad coalition of organizations. Um, and as you know, Social Driver, we have the privilege of being able to work with Face the Fight, and we just launched that brand new website. So I encourage folks to check out wefacethefight.org so they can see how they can get involved and see all of the great organizations that are part of it. There's tremendous resources that any of us can use, even if not in the service, but we all know somebody who is. We're all connected. And I think that's really just an important part of what the campaign does. I wanted to ask you, I mean, something you and I have talked about is a lot of people don't realize only 1% of people serve,
Yeah.
but we've heard from you today. There's so many things that we can all learn from the military, so many lessons, and civilian executives and communications leaders can learn. What's one leadership lesson that you think folks outside of the military should pay attention to and learn from what you've seen up front and up close in your career?
Yeah. I think there's a lot. Now that I've taken the uniform off and I spend a lot of time in different industries, both corporate and academia, what I would say is when it comes to military leaders and veterans, what I don't know that there's a full understanding of the strengths and the talents that they bring to your organizations. One of which is mission clarity. Like, we understand what the mission is, what the objectives are, and we understand how to get it done with little to no resources. I bet, like, that is just what we've learned from day one. We understand how to communicate. We understand how to mission plan to get after that. And we again, the clarity aspect I think is huge.
Sure.
So I think that I wish that more corporate leaders and academic leaders would hone in and really just take advantage of the veteran community and understanding that.
I love that. And then last question to close on, I always want to know from all of our guests, how do you define influence today? And has that changed over the course of your career?
Um, I don't know that I think that it's changed after, throughout my career. What I would say is influence is the opportunity for people to help shape the views and the thoughts and the actions of others. Um, in terms of has it shifted throughout my career, I think that every single human being has an opportunity to influence. But I think that as I've grown throughout my career, I've appreciated that sphere of influence has grown more and more and more, and I can't squander that opportunity. And so, as a leader of much, then you have an opportunity to influence much. And so, we ought to be doing our part.
I think that's such a great point to close on. It's something we talked about on the panel that we had a few months back, which is we all have the power of personal influence.
Yes.
You don't have to have chief at the front of your title to be a chief influencer in your own sphere. I mean, if you can influence one person who knows you, that can make a big impact. And obviously, people like you have much larger spheres, but we all have the power of personal influence. And whatever goal or mission we are supporting, we can leverage that personal influence to advance that mission. And that's really our mission with chief influencers. We want people to understand that, and we want them to build that confidence, but also learn the lessons like the ones you've shared today. And I just, Chief Bass, you shared so many great lessons with us, but I think where you sort of concluded the interview about mission clarity is something that we can get from people who serve in the military. It's just something it's a superpower that you all have. But that mission clarity is more important now than ever for any leader, any communicator in today's very fast moving and fragmented landscape. And so defining that mission so that we can get it done is critical. And you shared some really key lessons with us today. You talked about not confusing the chain of command with the chain of communication. I think that is just such a vital thing that we all need to remember. And then you gave a really specific example about how you empower people who are at different levels, even in such a hierarchy with the chain of command like the military. After your traveling around, almost all year, you always had those debriefs to get feedback where you invited people at all levels to share. And I think that's one very tactical takeaway that our listeners could say, wait, am I doing that after our event or after our initiative? Did I take the time for the debrief, and did I create space for people at all levels? Because we may get the best advice from somebody who might see it from a different perspective because they, might be farther down the chain of command. And then you talked about why it's so important to have intention and to build trust and to communicate that why, if we want to make it comfortable for people to share their feedback with us. And then lastly, just a line that stuck with me that I agree with is that he who has gets the information out first wins. And
Yeah.
so it's really important. We can't just sit back. We have to think proactively about communication. And that means doing what you had to do. You had to sort of lead on social channels. You had to, create a position just for that because you knew that's where your communities were getting their information. So, wow, so many great nuggets and lessons. Thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your story. 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joe Bass. And we're just grateful for the work you've done and that you're continuing to do, the mission that you're pursuing, and for sharing your story with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for the great roll up. Like we could be on teams together forever. Thanks for that. And thanks again, Anthony, for the work that Chief Influencer is doing, trying to make sure that you spread at scale all the goodness that's going around. And it's really a privilege to listen to your guests. And I look forward to meeting some of your listeners.
Thank you for tuning in. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver in partnership with the George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management and the Public Relations Society of America National Capital Chapter. Social Driver is a communications and digital agency that helps organizations and their leaders build trust and break through with people-centered communication strategies, digital campaigns, and future-ready websites. From brand strategy and thought leadership to creative content and digital experiences, we combine senior counsel with hands-on execution to turn expertise into influence. To learn more, visit socialdriver.com. For show notes, past episodes, or to nominate a future guest, visit chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.